There are two countries that matter here. The Russians have a demographic collapse, but they still have 140 million people, or maybe 130 is a more accurate read. The Russians kind of make up data. The other one is Germany. Now, Germany faces a demographic collapse too, but Germany has a couple of other things that people forget about. Number one, because of that demographic collapse, they need help from other countries to maintain their manufacturing supply chains. German labor is very highly skilled, but not all manufacturing chains require very highly skilled labor. They need some labor that's a little further down. That's Poland, that's Hungary, and to a certain degree, probably in the future, Ukraine. So the Germans in a post-America world aren't going to go west because the French keep their system to themselves. They have to go east. Well, the Russians are paranoid beyond belief about things that are coming in from their west. Most of the attacks that they've suffered over time have come from that direction. So the Russians are trying to reestablish the Soviet curtain that they had to get some strategic depth. So you've got the Germans for economic security going east and the Russians for physical security going west. We've seen this movie before. We know how it plays out. What's different this time is it's the last time. The Russians obviously have plenty of legacy equipment. I was speaking about demographics. Both nations have reached an irreversible stage of aging. The average age in both countries currently stands well above 45 years. Birth rates have collapsed on both sides. So whenever they do have another conflict, they will lack the financial, fiscal, demographic, and economic potential to regenerate their own societies. For Germany, it's pretty straightforward. Just because the birth rate has degraded so far for so long, they've been in negative rates now since reunification. For the Russians, the situation is a little messier because only about 70% of the Russian population is actually ethnically Russian, and the other 30% is primarily, although not exclusively, various Turkic minorities such as Tatars and Chechens. Hence, in the event of Russian breakdown, whenever and however it unfolds, they will also grapple with the loss of control over significant portions of their territory. We've seen this movie too in the past. We're going back to Tartary for those of you who know your history well. The advantage that I've got is there have been very few true points of demographic inversion globally. And because it takes 10, 20, 30, 40, even 50 years before you start seeing changes to economic structure, usually the system can adapt. The challenge we've got today is that it's technological and geopolitical. So technologically, when the world started to industrialize a century and a half ago, we started moving into smaller and smaller homes and ultimately into apartments, which meant that children went from being an essential labor force to really expensive furniture that just happened to move and back at you. This entails a distinct cost framework, and the preference isn't for numerous mobile pieces of furniture, as in the case of free laborers. The implications of this were divergent in 1900 compared to 1920, in contrast to the 1940s, differing from the 1960s, 1980 to 2000, and even today. However, if you persistently extend this trend, eventually individuals reach a stage where they either have no children or just one child. That's kind of piece one. Piece two is if you have rapid societal transformation, demographic trends change from being on a century scale to a generational scale. And that is what we have seen with the global order, because what we did in 1990 is basically say, all right, Cold War is over. Everyone who was part of our network before, whether it's Europe or Japan, is still part of our network, but it is now open to everyone else. And this is when Brazil joined the global order and China joined the global order. And we took the best technologies of the 1980s and hurled them with a bottomless supply of capital at parts of the world that had never industrialized. And so they did in 10 years when it took the Germans 50 years. You play that forward 30 years, and we now have a structure demographically that we've never seen before. It used to be that you'd have lots of children and then teenagers and then mature adults and retirees. It would be a pyramid. The Germans plowed the path of going in the opposite direction because if your birth rates drop fast enough for long enough, you then get more people in their 50s and their 40s and their 30s and their chance of children. What's happened now is it has been replicated across the world. And what is unique about this moment in history is that the 2020s, this decade, is the decade that the entire developed world and a substantial proportion of the developing world don't just simply move from having more mature adults than more children, but more retirees than mature and adults than children. Everything we understand about economics does not work in that environment. Fascism encounters difficulties in functioning effectively. I sincerely hope it doesn't succeed. Socialism faces challenges in its operation, and capitalism also encounters hurdles. Consequently, all the principles we have been educated in throughout our adult lives spanning the past 12, 15 generations are on the verge of being proven incorrect. And that's happened at the same time these Americans are pulling the rug out from under everything, and COVID just happened to come in and at this moment. It doesn't happen everywhere, and it doesn't happen at the same pace. Some countries are aging faster than others. Some countries have better geographies, and so they can push this back further. So, for example, the United States, France, Argentina, and Turkey. Those are 4 countries that I think are going to do very well in this post-war environment. Each of them is featured in the book, boasting relatively robust demographics. Consequently, they are poised to become central pillars within their respective regional system. I don't expect there to be a huge amount of trade or interaction on those systems, but there are systems that you can play in that broadly follow the rules that we're used to now. But all of those systems are still aging. That will be a problem for everyone in time, but the United States population is aging the most slowly of everyone except for New Zealand, which gives the United States time to either figure this out or copy other people or just slouch into Armageddon a half a century after everyone else. So worst case scenario, the dollar zone is going to be there. The UC economy is going to be there. The US economy is going to be there. The US political when strategic system is going to be there. It's smaller than obviously, but it's the biggest, baddest, most functional part of that system. And it's still a pretty big pond. The second answer is one, you're not going to like, this was supposed to be the 4th book. And that was how I was going to launch off book number 4. And I was thinking that since this was all going to end in the 2020s, that I was going to have 2-3 years to figure this out, right? Well, coronavirus has now come along, and most of the advanced countries are going to age out into mass retirement between 2022 and 2024. So 2 to 4 years from now, coronavirus has now removed a year, and any country that drops into severe recession in 2020 will not be able to grow back to where they were in January by the end of next year. So they're facing demographic collapse and change in economic structure before they can possibly recover to where they were 3 months ago. Now, going from where they were 3 months ago to this collapsed system, having that transition period of 2 to 3 years to change how you've been operating for half a millennia, that's still a really freaking tall order. But now they won't even have that opportunity. So we are looking at hard crashes and hard collapses in a substantial proportion of the world. And I just don't have time to write the damn book. Persia is eternal. It's one of the very few countries in the world that doesn't have what I would consider good internal geography. It's a series of highlands, mountains, valleys, and plateaus that normally wouldn't linked together. Anywhere else in the world, it would have never been a single country. It would have been, at best, a failed state. But it is surrounded by terrain that is even worse, which has allowed the Persians of old, going way back pre-Greece, to consolidate into a durable, flexible, sophisticated, multicultural entity. Before most others even contemplated such an idea, it has existed in some form for over 4,000 years, and it will persist for a considerable time to come. That doesn't mean it's a leading light. This is an area that got gutted by the colonial period and has now been gutted again by the Trump administration. Iran is actually a net importer of crude now. It's gotten that bad, and that changes the math. So the strategic environment that's shaping up in the region at large is a fight between them and Saudi Arabia, and the Iranians are coming off of kind of a 15-year build in influence. American war on terror proved to be a miscalculation on various fronts. However, it effectively dismantled the existing structures in the region, paving the way for the Iranians to seize control.